Andrei Tarkovsky is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. His 7 feature films comprise perhaps the most consistent filmography in cinema. Known for oftentimes slow pacing, philosophical tangents, and abstract emotional imagery, Tarkovsky's films can occasionally seem like a daunting task, and so I've decided to make this video as a kind of a beginner's guide, an overview to his work, his style, and my thoughts on each of his films, as well as an attempt to create a very rough and subjective recommended viewing order for his movies. A catalogued order for suggested engagement is something music fans are often used to. After all, when jumping into a new genre or a unique artist, it's not always advised to begin with a work that requires more contextualization within its genre. And for the works of Tarkovsky, I believe the same is also true, as Tarkovsky's films not only come from a completely different cinematic tradition to our Western one, something that is no doubt in part due to restrictions and censorship within the Soviet Union, but also as a part of an entirely different literary tradition as well. Tarkovsky was heavily inspired by the likes of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. Indeed, his unfinished passion project was in fact an adaptation of Dostoevsky's The Idiot. These writers were a part of what could be referred to as the golden age of Russian realism, a period in Russian literature in which writers oftentimes paused in their works to reflect on politics and philosophy with direct and explicit language. This isn't the show don't tell mentality that you're taught in school. It was a way for these writers to reflect on their work and on the world around them, and to do so in no uncertain terms. Tarkovsky's films very much share this style, and with the majority of his works running over 2.5 hours, there are plenty of moments in his films that require a meditative and open mind. You are not here meant to shut off from the world and forget that 3 hours are flying by, and one should always be ready to keep one's mind blank and allow your thoughts on everything from Wittgenstein to nuclear paranoia to flooding while watching. Anyway, without further ado, I present to you my roadmap for navigating the worlds of Andrei Tarkovsky.
Это что же, туда идти? К сожалению, другого пути нет. Как-то тускло, а, профессор? Тут мне как-то идти первым нежелательно.
Stalker provides most people's entry point for Tarkovsky's films. It's thick with atmosphere and mystery, and the complete uncertainty about what's actually happening in the film keeps you glued to your seat even when much of the film consists of 3 men very slowly walking into a room. There are lots of possibilities as to what the mysterious zone that they are traveling to actually is, how much is real and how much is just hysteria, but also with regards to each character's motivations and belief systems. These aspects of the film are fascinating to pick apart long after the film's runtime passes, but what really helps make the film truly special is its production design. Truly unique within the sci-fi genre, this perhaps post-apocalyptic world is grimy and dirty, and not in a Mad Max or Blade Runner way, just in a very down-to-earth realistic way. The world looks like, well, exactly what we're seeing. A disused, rundown and overgrown area that's flooded with chemicals, and this really helps sell the film's universe and story. And there's good reason why this is Tarkovsky's most talked about movie among film fans looking back on his work today.
Давай помогу.
Я сама.
Сама. Эх.
Another, perhaps more controversial route into Tarkovsky's work would be with Ivan's childhood. This is undoubtedly Tarkovsky's most accessible film, but it's no less a fantastic showcase of what makes this man such an unparalleled presence within cinema. Its high contrast black and white cinematography and its selective and haunting use of sound plunge you headstrong into this world. Nikolai Berlyayev's leading performance as the titular Ivan is also brilliant. He's one of Tarkovsky's most interesting and endearing characters, and his much of determination combined with his young age is expertly explored by both Berlyayev's acting and Tarkovsky's direction. The film perfectly merges the brothers-in-arms conflict against the Nazis with the horrors of war, and tops it all off with its beautiful and evocative dream sequences, and it is a film that I have absolutely no trouble recommending to virtually everyone who's not yet experienced it. One final route into Tarkovsky's films may actually be through one of his most experimental works, and that's one of his all-time great movies, Mirror. Though its avant-garde, dreamlike, free-flowing narrative may seem a little daunting, it's definitely his most human film, endlessly emotive and watchable with perhaps Tarkovsky's tightest pacing. The images Tarkovsky casts looking back on our main character's life are effective on almost a superhuman level. You can analyze forever what makes some of the scenes in this film hit so hard, but ultimately the best thing to do, especially on your first watch, is to just sit back and experience the film, and to not let the logic or desire to completely understand the film's timeline take over. Mirror's influence can still very much be felt today through films such as David Lowery's A Ghost Story or Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void, and it's truly an essential watch for those interested in cinema. Once you've tackled those three films, it's time to dig a little deeper into Tarkovsky's filmography with some of his long philosophical dramas. His period piece, Andrei Rublev, and his most influential work of science fiction, Solaris, are both almost 2 films in one, ranging from nearly 3 hours in length to almost 4. And in a similar manner to Stalker, both films are not afraid to pause the action and meditate on the nature of reality and the importance of art.
Хари нет. Она умерла. А вы только ее повторение. Механическое повторение. Копия. Матрица.
Solaris' legacy can be felt across the entire science fiction genre, and not just in film. This was my introduction to the world of Tarkovsky, and I heard about it not through any cinematic context, but because it was a huge influence on Redwood Shaw's survival horror game Dead Space, and it's easy to see how. The terrifying isolation and madness one must experience when trapped on a spaceship with nothing but your crew and the whole entire universe around you was something hitherto unexplored in cinema. The film was made as a rebuttal to Kubrick's 2001, which Tarkovsky viewed as emotionally shallow and with, quote, only pretensions to the truth, unquote. Solaris uses its interstellar setting to explore the film's characters and the psychology of isolation, tapping into themes of madness and the true meaning of existence and experience. It's not a light watch, and frankly the first 40 minutes set on Earth could have been trimmed right down, something Soderbergh's by far inferior remake shows to do. Nevertheless, this is still a massively important work of science fiction that is still fantastic, if a little overlong, and definitely earns its reputation as a historically important film. From outer space to the 15th century, Andrei Rublev is aesthetically as far as one could possibly get away from Solaris. Tarkovsky blends the real and surrealism, philosophy, morality, spirituality, and politics in this murky and grimy historical epic. Made up of at times disparate chapters, the film never ceases to move in surprising directions. There's a large-scale battle sequence and it's exactly as good as you'd hope for a battle sequence shot by Tarkovsky. There are moments of complete fantasy and they're exactly as unique and emotive as you'd expect, and the film's final moments are perhaps one of the most surprising passages of any of his films. Though the film's disjointed story structure does make emotional involvement before the film's intermission somewhat difficult, the film manages to nevertheless be a rewarding experience. The final segment of which alone would make an outstanding short, but it's also made much greater by the preceding drama. Truly epic in scope and concept, this is an incredible cinematic achievement, and a film that helped further establish Tarkovsky's reputation outside of the Soviet Union. Lastly, we come to Tarkovsky's final 2 films, The Sacrifice and, my personal favourite, Nostalgia. This is the culmination of Tarkovsky's career leading up to these movies. They are dark, haunting works that pull no punches and do not hold back. And they not only feature some of the best cinematography and stories of his filmography, but also have 2 of the greatest endings in film ever.
Vi väntar väl alla på någonting. Ta mig till exempel. Hela livet har jag gått och väntat på någonting. Hela livet har jag känt det faktiskt som om jag befann mig på en järnvägsstation.
The Sacrifice was Tarkovsky's final film, and, Perhaps aptly, it was also his bleakest work. The portrait of the bourgeoisie during the end of the world is both satirical and shocking, and its masterful tonal shifts are managed with the care that one would need to be able to successfully pull them off. And yes, the film's final moments. Don't even look at the poster for this if you've not already seen it, because it's one gigantic spoiler, but man, it's a hell of an image. Despite all the praise I'm giving this is probably my least favourite of his films. The first half does feel a little aimless and it borrows some imagery straight from Mirror. However, the fact that this, a film most directors could only ever dream of making, is simply a minor work from Tarkovsky, speaks volumes about the man's artistry and craftsmanship. The film may be fairly uneven, but when it works it really doesn't hold back, and it's definitely a film you would not want to skip over.
Madre di tutte le madri che conosci la gioia di essere madre, madre di tutti i figli che conosci la gioia di avere tuo figlio, madre di tutti i figli che conosci il dolore di non avere tuo figlio, madre che tutto comprendi, aiuta tua figlia a diventare madre.
And finally, we move from my least favourite to my undeniable favourite, and one of the greatest films ever made, Nostalgia. I'm honestly unsure how I could do this movie justice. The acting is superb, not a single line is wasted, and the main characters just leap off the screen. The cinematography and imagery is second to none, rivaling Tarkovsky's most surreal works in terms of complexity and emotional abstraction. The spirituality espoused in the film is palpable, and the rising tension just builds and builds until we get to the great double whammy of the film's two contrasting and evocative final scenes. This is a powerful and sophisticated work of cinema, one that I think about fairly frequently despite only having seen it twice, and it was very much the film that solidified Tarkovsky as one of my all-time favourite filmmakers. Tarkovsky died young at age 55 due to what was most likely poisoning caused from exposure to chemical waste during the filming of Stalker. Remember when I talked about the realistic and dirty feeling production design? Well, perhaps it was a little too realistic. His assistant director and wife Larissa Tarkovskaya passed away 10 years later from the same type of lung cancer as well. Tarkovsky is remembered as perhaps the Soviet Union's premier cinematic artist, held alongside the likes of Sergei Eisenstein and Dziga Vertov in their experimentation and boundary-pushing cinema. This video has done the man absolutely no justice. Indeed, it was never intended to. His films are layered and thought-provoking works that burn themselves into your mind and demand introspection greater than the brief overview of his filmography that I have done. I hope this guide has encouraged those uninitiated with Tarkovsky's work to dive in and experience a fundamentally different kind of film to that which we are used to, as well as managing to convey a Cliff Notes version of what I think of each of his films. Every single country, no matter their political ideology, has artists worth paying attention to. Tarkovsky felt hard done by his reputation as a Soviet director, and found it harder to gain the international reputation that he did end up managing to carve out. It is definitely a well-deserved legacy, as Tarkovsky now rightfully sits beside the great filmmakers within the cultural zeitgeist. He is a most unique director. There's a reason that still in contemplative films are occasionally known as Tarkovsky-esque, and he is definitely a director I feel better off from having been able to view his films. Thank you for watching. This came out during the biopic mania of, you know, Bohemian Rhapsody, whatever that Motley Crue one was called, the Elton John one. But then after that sort of opening 10-15 minutes, it becomes a much more poignant, serious, I mean, fun, but still a much more interesting film about a relationship between Varg and Euronymous, and a much more interesting film about sort of toxic masculinity and these sort of overgrown man-children, basically, in a very unflattering, unbiopic-y way.
Well, yeah, that's exactly the thing, isn't it?